All right. My name is David Kaylor. I am a criminal defense attorney. My office is located at 3001 Bartow Road in Lakeland. It's about a half block north of Edgewood Drive. If you're looking for a criminal defense attorney or a personal injury attorney, give us a call at 668-7223, or we can be found on the web at kaylorlaw.com. I do not do family law, but I have the distinct honor and privilege of practicing law with someone who does.
Yeah, choke that out there. Yeah, you couldn't honor. Mark Mcmann, McMahonlaw.com. I do family law. I do divorces. I do paternity actions. I do alimony. All that falls under the umbrella of family law, as well as child support and time sharing. We also do wills and trusts and some military law. So give me a call if you have a need for anything in that regard, 863-393-9010.
Folks, if you have any questions for us, you're welcome to call us here at 682-1430. That's 682-1430. Hey, Mark, I was thinking about getting with a local chiropractor and offering like gift certificates for a 30-minute massage if somebody answers the question, like a trivia question, correctly. And maybe we would
I think that's a genius idea.
Boost our listening audience from 3 to maybe 6 or 7.
Well, it would also improve the participation of the audience.
Yeah, so we don't have that just yet, but we're thinking about doing that.
Well, of course, it helps everybody. You know,
Yeah.
It helps the chiropractor, it helps us, it helps the audience. It's a win-win-win for everybody.
I'm a giver.
You are a giver.
I'm a giver. Okay, so let's get to this show here today. First of all, the name of the show is Law Talk, but occasionally during the political season, we find ourselves veering towards or veering away from legal issues and talking somewhat more about politics. Today, we're going to talk about some of the various laws that were passed by the legislature that have been attacked and overturned by some federal judges. Talk about the reasons for those laws from both sides. And but before we do that, Mark's going to give us a little bit of a rant.
Well, no, it's not. If you've been listening to the radio at all today, if you've been listening to the radio at all for the past 5 weekdays, you've heard about these polls that have come out. These polls that have come out from the CBS New York Times poll, or from the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, or even from the Fox News poll for that matter. And the way that these polls are done, and again, I'm not telling anybody who listens to this radio station pretty much throughout the day anything that they haven't heard, but for those of you who don't normally listen, you tune in just for this show because you can't wait to hear it once a week. What you have here is these polls that are coming out showing an advantage for Obama in these particular swing states, or even nationally. They're really using a model that is different than that of what I would suggest they should be using.
When you say a model, what does that mean? Aren't they just doing random phone calls to, sort of a sampling?
Well, no, they do a sampling, but they do a sampling based on a certain amount of Democrats and a certain amount of Republicans. And the example that is pretty much the clearest is the CBS New York Times poll. It had Obama ahead by 7 or 8 or 9 points last week. And the thing is that if you look at that particular sampling, they went off of the 2008 model, which a lot of pollsters do because it makes sense. You can't really go by, or at least they don't think they can go by, a 2010 model because there wasn't a presidential election. So they go back to the model of what was the most recent presidential election. Now, that was a very unique election. It was a very unique election for a lot of different reasons. Obama was kind of an unknown, soaring rhetoric, not much vetting, I would say. Then you had McCain, who probably ran the worst campaign I think I've ever seen. I would walk for him and I would see it, I'd feel it. It was just this, like you're being drowned by a wet blanket, But anyway, so using these 2008 models,
you said because of the dynamics of that particular campaign, which caused there to be historically probably more Democrats excited and involved in it as opposed to Republicans, that using that as sort of the ratio for the sampling, it's going to skew the results that we have today.
Correct. And in fact, in Florida, and again, you can go through any one of these states that talk about this, in Florida, the amount of Democrats over Republicans that voted in Florida was +3 in 2008. Okay? Now, in 2010, again, not a presidential election. It was an off-year election. It was a congressional election. There was a lot of fire. It was the first 2 years of the Obama administration. You had the Republicans come out. They came out a lot stronger, obviously. There was a Republican landslide that nobody predicted. The polls didn't predict. Nobody predicted it. But in the state of Florida, it was +4 Republicans. Okay. Now you have a poll that comes out from the CBS New York Times, and again, they're all doing this. Some are doing it more than just the 2008 model, CBS New York Times being an example. Obama's winning by, I think I said 7, 8, or 9. But they sampled +9 Democrats in the state of Florida. So even in the best year that we've known for a presidential campaign, a Democratic presidential campaign, since, let's say, 1992, maybe 1996, had +3, yet you're polling people in this political environment at a +9 in the state of Florida.
Do you think that there's some degree that sort of it creates a narrative that there's a degree of inevitability about Obama that is going to hurt that's what they're concerned about?
Yes.
It's going to hurt the Romney campaign?
That's what they want, early voting.
Okay.
Now, what traditionally happens, and again, you look back historically at the other presidential elections, there's some of this that goes on all the time, especially, and this segues into our conversation that we're going to have later on, as early voting has really, really come to the forefront. I mean, the last, I think you said 10 years is what you remember. Before then, you have to go on a certain day to do it on Tuesday. But in this particular case, of course they're doing it because they want to get that narrative out there for those people that are early voting, those people that are absentee balloting, saying, oh, this is the way it's going to be, because nobody's going to remember the CBS New York Times poll from October 1st.
But you said the Fox News poll also was using a
2008 model.
2008 model.
Right.
So I mean, you can't say that it's a vast conspiracy of the liberal media if Fox News is doing it as well. I mean, what do you think the answer to this is?
I think that they're using the 2008 model, or something very close to the 2008 model, because that's just the way that particular company does it. I do think that when you have, and theirs is not that, I mean, it's like a +4, +5. That's even using the 2008 model. But you have the New York Times, you have the NBC poll that are doing it in the example that's most stark.
Yeah, but the NBC poll was also the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, and presumably that would not be.
You would presume that, but if they're, I'm just telling you, they're using a model that's even higher than the 2008. I don't know why that is, why they want to do it. But now you're going to see that, and when I say that, the Wall Street Journal, why they'd be on board, maybe, I don't know. Maybe
yeah, but they are part of that poll. I mean,
they are part of the poll, right? But they're
they're owned by Rupert Murdoch, the same guy that owns the Fox News.
I can't explain. Well, I mean, the other side of it could be that perhaps they're thinking that it'll fire people up to go out there and vote too, and everybody wins. I don't know, but I do know that if you're skewing it above 2008 model, you can't go by it. That's all I know.
Well, what are you supposed to go by? Just make it up?
A Zogby.
What's that?
Zogby.
Zogby.
Zogby has a poll that has been traditionally one of the top 5, and a lot of times the top 1 poll when it comes to accuracy.
I've heard of Zogby. I mean, it's been around. They're very, very well known. What are they saying?
They're saying that nationally, Romney, this was last week, had an advantage of 14 points among independents.
Among independents.
Yeah.
But overall, where do we get?
I think it was a 2. Well, no, it's a 2-point or 1-point race depending on the day.
Nationally,
nationally.
Within the margin of error. This race is tied.
Correct.
And nobody wants to talk about that in terms of when you say that the mainstream media doesn't want to do that because they think that would excite those.
They would excite the Republicans to
Right.
get out there. I mean, I think that what they're thinking is, and again, the more liberal side of it, and they own the media. I mean, we all know it. People say that people are more conservative on Fox, and I would agree with that. But
Right.
people can say that seem a lot more conservative on Fox because all you've ever known is liberalism thrown down your throat your first 30 years of life, if you're somebody about my age. But ultimately, their whole goal is to say, I'm going to stay home. It's early voting. Why am I going to bother? This guy's lost it. He's
Right.
stiff. He's no good. He's no Reagan. Obama, it's inevitable. Those people that the 40-some
You really
percenters are going
believe
to go out and vote.
that is what the intent of the NBC Wall Street Journal poll?
Yes.
You think Wall Street Journal is in on this as well?
I don't know to the degree. I mean, for all I know, they could just sponsor it. I don't know
If they're going to lend their name to it, one would assume that they would have some idea as to what the voting, or excuse me, the sampling and the protocol is for the survey.
I can't get into their minds. I can just tell you they're sampling above 2008 levels.
So they're in on it now too.
I suspect so.
Okay.
Or they don't know any better.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back with more of Law Talk.
Hi, I'm Tim Harris, and I'm a school board member from District 7 in Polk County School Board, and thank you for listening to Law Talk.
I'm Brent Gohagan of Gohagan, PA. If you are a business owner, you have undoubtedly had that moment when you realize, I wish I had someone trained to help me, guide me in the drafting of that contract, or you have been concerned about the prospect of your business being sued over something frivolous or needing guidance in a business dispute regarding some negligence or intentional action on the part of another business or individual. We are here to navigate you through this. We care because we know as a small business it matters to you. Visit us at Gohagan, PA.
Welcome back to Law Talk, sponsored by the Kaylor Law Group and Mcmann, PA. Mark, I guess what I'm getting at is that you are quick to say CBS News, New York Times, the reason they're doing this is because they want to suppress voter turnout amongst the Republicans. But essentially the same formula is being used by Wall Street Journal.
Not the exact same.
Well,
they're still skewing it. Right.
Skewing
right.
it. A couple points here and there. The Wall Street Journal and Fox News, but you don't come to the same conclusions about them.
Well, the Fox News is doing what I understand of something very similar to the 2008 model. Okay, I'm saying that if you're taking a sampling, which the 2008 model was +3, and you're taking in Florida, and you're taking +9. Understand, 2008 model was a +3, and suddenly you're gleaning that there's going to be 9% more Democrats to vote. I would say
what does +9 mean?
Means 9% more Democrats are going to vote than Republicans.
Which, as we discussed off the air, would be an absolute landslide, which
Right.
nobody is predicting.
I would say, and Fox isn't doing that.
Right, okay, I gotcha.
And that's what I'm saying.
So you think Fox is you disagree with the way Fox is doing it because you don't think this is going to be a 2008 type election, but you understand why they're doing that. You are saying that not the Wall Street Journal, but the New York Times poll is adding numbers that have no reasonable basis for being added.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of the others are simply using the 2008 model.
Which you disagree with it, but you understand it.
Yes.
Okay.
Because you have to put more work into it.
Yeah.
I think it's the lazy man's way of just taking the models from 2008. It's pretty lazy. Zogby goes the extra step and actually looks at 2010. He gets deeper in the numbers of each individual state for registration. Obviously, the likely voters, I think it's the super voters is what they call them, to see, well, not only are they likely, but they voted in the last 3 or 4 elections. That's something that's a lot more accurate. And quite honestly, what we were talking about on break is I went out and did some Romney, walk for Romney a few Saturdays ago. And I was knocking on doors.
How do people react when you come knock on their door on a Saturday afternoon?
A lot of them aren't home. So you leave something, for them. Some sort of brochure, but not only do you do that, but when they answer the door, most of them are very, very friendly. And
even people, are you knocking on only super voters' doors?
We're voting on super voters as well as likely voters, but they're soft Democrats. My particular day, they were soft Democrats and soft Republicans.
A super voter is somebody that has voted a certain number of times in a row. Is that correct?
Over a certain amount of, whether they be presidential elections as well as the off-year midterm elections.
The guy that votes at the midterms in the last presidential election is far more likely than not to show up this next election.
Absolutely.
The person that shows up at a certain number of consecutive presidential elections is probably going to show up at this presidential election. But the person who hasn't showed up or showed up sporadically, every 4 years, maybe every 8 years, no one's going to be knocking on their door probably.
Right. They may hit it, but that's going to be an afterthought because you're going to hit those people that are more target rich first. And the target, it wasn't even like going out to the conservative ones, because I think what they've determined and what they think is that those who are staunch Republicans are going to go for Romney because of the environment. I think Romney has successfully been able to show that he, in fact, is conservative by his speaking, by not only the way he's portrayed himself, but also just the environment itself and how so many conservatives will just walk through glass in order to vote for him and therefore vote against Obama.
Yeah, there are more people voting against Obama or for Romney. Where do you think they are? Are you getting a sense of that?
I just...
Who cares, I guess?
It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
But, when walking and seeing these soft Democrats and soft Republicans, I'm just telling you, I got a very good reception.
How do you determine okay, I understand why you would knock on a super voter, registered Republican supervoter. I'm a registered Republican supervoter, and I have gotten more literature from Mitt Romney. I swear I think I get something like twice a week.
You're like his best friend.
I'm like, Mitt, I'm going to vote for you. Just please send this somewhere else. Go use it somewhere else. You got my vote. Please let me out of this. And so I see why they're hitting me. But how do they know somebody's a soft Democrat? What is that? Because you can tell how somebody's registered, and folks may not know this. The government knows what party you're in, and they know when you have voted, okay? And they will release that information to anybody that asks for it and is prepared to pay a reasonable fee for it. There are people who specialize in this sort of stuff. Micro-targeting, there's no secret. A lot of people, however, were surprised to find that out. But what they don't know is who you voted for, obviously. So how do you determine who's a soft Democrat?
I don't know the science of that. I don't know unless they just
do it
look
based upon income and education.
They probably use an income education where they live. I think that's a big part of how they determine.
Because there are people still out there who registered as a Democrat 30 years ago and have just never bothered to change. change.
I think there's a lot of that in Polk County.
A lot of that, and a lot of people, including my grandmother, I think, who did not switch over to the Republican Party until like 10 years ago.
Well, believe it or not, you may know this, but there are more registered Democrats in Polk County than Republicans.
Right, and there are people who are registered Democrats who have not voted for a Democrat in probably 20 or 30 years.
Probably since 1980.
Yeah, since 1980.
Right.
That was a bit of a sea change, obviously. All right, let's get to some guests that we have coming up.
We actually do have a phone call,
Oh,
apparently.
we do. All right, let's hear it. Hey, Lawrence, how you doing, man? It's a New York Times company. I think I tell you what, Lawrence, the kiss of death in the last couple of elections is the endorsement from the Lakeland Ledger. I don't think too many candidates were upset to see that go by the wayside. I would say, and this is somebody who is, well, in this particular room is probably considered more of a moderate, but out on the street, I'm right of center. I would say that even I can recognize a left of center viewpoint in not only some of the editorials, but the way that certain articles were written in the Ledger. I don't think it's crazy left-wing because it wouldn't sell papers in Polk County, but it is a New York Times company. And I mean, you know, in terms of the people that make their way into the paper, there are certainly some conservatives that work for the Lakeland Ledger, but I think that particular field, journalism, brings in kind of a somewhat liberal,
more of a liberal, yeah, especially since the 1960s.
Yeah, so I'm not surprised by it. I'm not necessarily offended by it. I am on the lookout for it, but I don't get all my news from the Lakeland Ledger. And by the way, I think everybody should get their news from more than one source.
Yeah, Lawrence, I think from my perspective, whenever I look at, I don't have a subscription, but I do look at it online as often as I can, and everything from the way that the headlines are written, to the articles, but also to the way that the photographs are chosen from the AP or if they get them from the New York Times. It all shows it. I chalk it up to it is what it is. It's been that way forever. I think that they're not changing many minds in Polk County because the people are smart enough who actually read it to recognize it for what it is. Because I hear a lot of people complain about it. So, I mean, you know, until some things change when it comes to the political writing over there in one way or another, I don't.
I think technology may catch up with the Ledger before it's all said and done.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that. Let me say this about the Lakeland Ledger and other local newspapers. I think they provide a wonderful service.
A local service, yes.
A wonderful local service. Whether you agree with their politics or disagree with their politics, at the end of the day, they do some investigative journalism at the local level. And I don't mean just the Lakeland Ledger. I mean local newspapers throughout the United States. That when they are gone, there is unlikely to be anybody to fill that void, and that is not good. I mean, there have been Republican and Democratic city councilmen all over the country, state issues, Department of Children and Family issues, all sorts of issues that that have been caught. And the Ledger has done more than their fair share of investigative journalism, where at the end of the day it has exposed fraud and deceit and rampant abuses and wastes of money that would otherwise not have been exposed. So I think the Ledger provides a valuable service. If you recognize that they are somewhat liberal, which they are, well, that's just the way it is.
Well, and I think that's the way it is across the country with a lot of these local papers. And quite honestly, I look at it like this too. When it comes to the Ledger, I look at it because I care about certain things. Being a lawyer, I want to read up on certain things. But generally, I don't get my news from the local. I mean, I'll go to Drudge or Fox News, or I even go to MSNBC sometimes to know what the enemy's thinking.
You know what they're thinking?
Yeah, but I don't think a lot of young people think that way. No, it's more of unfortunately, a more of a global view, a more national view when it comes to everything from social issues to politics.
Well, these newspapers are hurting badly. They are. Selling buggy whips in a combustion engine age. I'll be one of those guys that will have a newspaper delivered till the day I die. I have to have that newspaper in my hand. But, we did a tour of the Ledger in one of those leadership programs, and they just have floors that are empty, that were not empty 10 years ago. Really? And it just does not bode well for them. But I do hope that they hang in there. I think that they are good. They and all other local newspapers, no matter what their political persuasion is, they are good for the community. They provide information that is otherwise you're just not going to know about. All right, do we have any other questions? Any other call? I thought we had another one, Dan. All right, we're going to go ahead and take an early break, and we'll be back. We're actually going to talk about some of these laws and the reaction to them with respect to voting.
Hello, I'm Mark Mcmann. I started Mcmann, PA after serving 10 years as a United States Army JAG Corps officer, as a military lawyer. That experience instilled in me certain attributes, including dedication, loyalty, sacrifice, hard work. I have made those attributes the cornerstone, the foundation of Mcmann, PA. If you're going through a divorce, a paternity action, a child custody battle, or perhaps a child support battle, call us at 863-393-9010 or visit us at mcmannlaw.com. We are with you, honest, hardworking, and loyal every step of the way.
Kaylor Law Group in McMahon, PA. Mark, it was a beautiful weekend, and I'm wondering if any of these good people out there might have had a little too much fun.
That happens sometimes, especially when it's a beautiful weekend.
Yeah, one thing leads to another. Next thing you know, you're knocking off a liquor store. Hey, I'm not going to judge you. Just give me a call at 668-7223. That's 668-7223. I don't suspect that too many folks in our vast listening audience are knocking over liquor stores, but maybe they've got a nephew or a niece that might have gotten maybe a disorderly conduct, maybe a DUI, a possession of marijuana. It's one of those things. It's especially for our youth.
Young people can do foolish things growing up.
They can do foolish things. I think the young man, they say the young man's frontal lobe does not fully develop until age 25. They engage in some impetuous activity.
Some people would say 45.
7:45. So I'm
Yeah.
like a couple years away. I'm excited about it. I'm finally going to grow up. No, Mark, I don't want to grow up. I'm going to grow old. I'm not going to grow up. That's my plan. Anyway, let's get back to this fascinating topic here. Let's talk real quick about some people that we hope to have come on. I want to have a homicide detective come on. I think I'll be able to do that probably within the next 60 days. I'm going to have somebody in the traffic homicide unit come on and talk about the process of investigating, DUI, manslaughter, vehicular homicide, that sort of thing. I tell you, there is nothing in the world that is worse for a police officer in that particular unit. Obviously, there are worse things for a police officer if one of their own is killed. But if a police officer in the traffic unit to have to go knock on a parent's door at 1 o'clock in the morning and tell them that their daughter or son has been killed in a traffic accident, it is just an awful thing to occur, and it is part of the process. It's part of the job. And so that should be a very interesting topic, because it really is interesting how these folks from the Sheriff's Office, the Highway Patrol, Lakeland Police Department, and some of the other agencies will come upon this accident with cars and debris strewn all over the place, and they will literally put it back together. It's like taking an egg that's been dropped on the ground and putting it back together.
There's a science to it.
There is a science to it, and they do tremendous work. We hope to have Professor Bruce Anderson from Florida Southern come on. He has been the go-to guy for the Ledger. I know you and Lawrence don't read the Ledger, but if you do, you will see that he had been used quite regularly by them for political commentary, especially during the conventions. And so I'd like to think that we found him first.
We did. We discovered him. He was discovered here.
Yes. Well, actually, he was discovered at my Rotary meeting. He gave a speech at my Rotary meeting. I'm like, this guy's great. I want to have him on the show. We had him on a few weeks later. He's been on there, been on a few times since then, and he said he would come back probably about 3 weeks before the election.
Right. And we're about there.
Yeah, it's coming up fast. So we're going to have him back on. We look forward to that. Now, Mark, there has been a great amount of hullabaloo because of some changes in voting requirements that were passed last year by the legislature. Let's talk about those that have been sort of attacked in federal court.
Oh, you think that Rick Scott was, trying to take us back to...
That he was standing in front of the polling locations.
Right, yeah, blocking people.
Yeah, there were I'll give you my personal opinion on them. The first one that they did is the early voting, okay? Now, before this law was passed, I'm not sure exactly how long each county could do early voting. I think it was pretty much up to the county, which is not a good idea, that one county might have 5 days and another county might have 10 days. I mean, you need to have uniformity, because it's a matter of due process that everybody, when it comes to voting, that everybody be pretty much the same. But you obviously want to have some degree of latitude to let the supervisor of elections make the call out there on the field. But for the most part, we should have some uniformity. But what they've done now is that they say that they're going to have a total of looks like 8 days. It used to be at least 12 days. Apparently, it was done before that. You used to have at least 12 days of early voting, and at least 12. I mean, that makes me believe that it could have been more than 12. To 8 days, with anywhere from 48 to 96 hours. And I think what Governor Scott is hoping for, in fact, he's even said...
So explain that. What do you mean, 8 days of early voting?
Yeah, the early voting, which I don't remember doing early voting until after 2000. But early voting allows for up to the Saturday before the election, allows for the registered voter to come in and vote early. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to, if you live in Bartow and you happen to be at the Lakeland Courthouse, you can go vote at the Lakeland Courthouse for your local Bartow election. They actually have the ballots for all the various races throughout the county. They really do an amazing job. And they give you now, the law is that they will have the polling locations. There are much more limited polling locations for early voting. I mean, there are polling locations everywhere on the day of the election, but there are much more limited polling locations. For instance, they had them at the City Hall in Bartow, Lakeland Courthouse, Winter Haven Branch Courthouse, and the major cities throughout the county for 8 days. And the Governor Scott is hoping there will be a minimum of 48 hours, meaning 6 hours a day. But what he's hoping for is that for 8 days they'll be open 12 hours a day, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., consistent with what they're open on the day of the election. And people are just going crazy about this, like it's the end of the world, which is kind of bizarre. If you can't find what you've got, first of all, you can do absentee balloting. If you can't find 20 minutes and 8 days of early voting to get down there and vote, or the day of the election, which is what it was when you and I were first able to vote many years ago.
Which I preferred that, by the way.
Well, I understand that, but sure. There's nothing at all. I find nothing at all wrong at all about tightening up these requirements. Al Sharpton made it look like it was that we had Jim Crow laws and poll taxes and literacy tests and all that sort of stuff. I was not offended by that. I think there was a legitimate purpose. And another reason is that you can't just say that we're going to have early voting for 8 days just for the November presidential elections. They have the same rules for all the elections. Mm-hmm. And so let me tell you something, folks. I was at some of these. I had people that were involved, friends of mine and family that were involved in these last elections, and we were at these early voting sites. This was an August election, a primary election. There was nobody there. Mm-hmm. I mean, nobody was showing up to vote. And so, this costs money. You have to have volunteers there. And to suggest that this needs to go on for 12 or 14 days is absurd, because it doesn't just happen for the presidential elections. It happens for all these elections, and it was a waste of time and money. So I thought this was a very reasonable compromise. And the federal courts agreed, with the exception of a very few counties. I don't know if Polk County was one of them. I don't think that they were, but I wouldn't swear to it. But a number of different counties, I think less than 10 throughout the state, that had a history of racial discrimination at the ballot box, and have made it so that they cannot have that more limited early voting.
And you said that one of them, you believe, was actually down south, which is odd.
Yeah.
Like South Florida.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're using things that happened in the 50s and 60s to dictate what should happen today. I think it's a bit archaic, anachronistic, I guess, but it is what it is. I think at the end of the day, we will settle on that. If we can come up with something that allows for 8 days and 12 hours a day, how could you argue with that? Now, the one thing that I did agree with the federal court is that they used to be that when you would get these little voter registration things where they would go out and they would go to college campuses and senior citizens and minority urban areas to get folks to register to vote, that they had up to 10 days to turn in those cards. And they restricted that back to 48 hours, not 2 business days.
After getting the signature, 48
signature.
hours to get it in rather than 10 days.
And I understand that there were certain, independent agencies, third parties that were probably engaging in some unscrupulous activities, but the League of Women Voters is not one of them, and they stopped doing their voters registration drive, which they've been doing for decades and decades and decades. The federal courts have tossed that thing out altogether because they found no legitimate purpose. They found no legitimate purpose to go from 10 days to 48 hours.
Right.
And, I'm not sure why the Republican legislature did it. Some people have suggested that they're hoping to suppress votes. I don't buy into that. I think they are simply that voting is not only a right, it's a privilege, and they want to tighten it up.
They want to tighten it up and make sure that it's not become a mockery, because there has been a lot since the 2008 election. A lot of coverage on that. I think we have a call.
Okay. But anyway, I agree with the one about the limited days. The one dropping down to 48 hours, that just seems a little unrealistic, because if you go with one of these voters registration drives out at University of Florida and you get 6,000 or 7,000 students to do it on a Friday, you've got voters. It's not realistic that you're going to get them there
48 hours. And that makes sense.
Yeah. All right. Yes, sir, or ma'am, what is your question or comment? Well, sir, we appreciate your comments and your questions. We've got to take a break, and we'll come back and try to address them. The last segment of Law Talk, sponsored by the Kaylor Law Group and Mcmann, PA. Mark, we record this show now, not every week, but we record probably half of them, and we post them on lawtalkflorida.com.
Yes, lawtalkflorida.com. People can tune in there, or they can actually get to it through mcmannlaw.com, and I think we also have a feed at kaylorlaw.com.
I'm not sure if you probably have been holding out on me.
We're working at that.
Yeah.
But YouTube, and you can get on YouTube. But the thing is that I think we do have the capability now. We're kind of checking into it, or we will hopefully next week. But that call was not taken down on that video. So what I want to do is just recap for the purpose of that. And essentially what the gentleman said, he called in, he said he got in his truck, he was listening, interesting conversation. But really, how much can our votes be counted? You hear this rhetoric when the example he gave is a lot of the precincts are governed by one party or another. And you have, especially it comes to light in close cases. The examples he gave were the Al Franken case up there in Minnesota, which was razor thin. Also the example in 2000 when you had certain absentee ballots that were not counted in certain states, which could have made a change with the popular vote overall.
Well, let's try to attack those issues one at a time. No precincts in the state of Florida are controlled by a political party.
Right.
Now, apparently, I keep reading about the supervisor elections being a Republican or Democrat in some of these articles that have come out with some recent voter registration fraud that was supposedly done by a Republican paid for in the organization. I don't think it was I think it was just a bunch of guys out there making $12 an hour trying to register as many people as they could. I don't believe there was a concerted effort. But be that as it may, our supervisor of elections, although like in anybody else, they have their own political opinions. I think the overwhelming majority, if not all of them, when it comes to doing their job, they're very nonpartisan. In Polk County, the supervisor elections is a nonpartisan position. I'm assuming it is that way throughout the state, although you might ultimately know the person's political persuasion, like Lori Edwards. Everybody knows she's a Democrat. She ran against Dennis Ross, this fellow from Okaloosa County who had to report some voter fraud from one of these organizations that was registering voters on the behalf of the Republican Party. He's a registered Republican. But I don't believe that any precinct is controlled by a particular party. And I have to use examples of Polk County because that's what I know best. The people you will see at the various precincts, no matter whether it be a largely Democratic or a largely Republican area, are people who are simply down there volunteering their time.
Right.
I don't think that I mean, surely up in Chicago, you've got party politics going on where I think that's where...
There's no fraud up there.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think that's an issue in Polk County. The other issue are in the state of Florida, and also the vast majority now, because you have to have more recent technology. The law is now that we're not going to have any more hanging chads and that sort of stuff. In Polk County, they are scanned there at the precincts and transmitted to the results are transmitted to the local headquarters. There aren't any ballots that end up in someone's trunk for weeks at a time. Now, they have had things like that happen recently in some of our southern counties, which does go to affecting the confidence in the voting process. But I think a lot of these folks, this is a human process. There are human beings involved, and people do make mistakes. But you don't want to affect the integrity or the legitimacy of any race. The last thing that he talked about was some of the things that the networks were doing and giving the results of the balloting in one state before another state had an opportunity to close their ballots. They are starting to move away from that. They will not give you the results of the state of Florida when part of it is
until they close.
Until they close, which is
that was terrible.
It was terrible. It was terrible. They should have done it because people up in the Panhandle, they declared it for Florida. They didn't even bother to go on down there and drive.
That happened a lot.
It happened a lot. A lot of military veterans that would have otherwise voted for George Bush did not go down there and vote. But that's a First Amendment issue, so it's easier said than done. I mean, you may not like what the political talking heads are doing on NBC or ABC or Fox News, because they're doing it on Fox News as well. But we do not have a right to control their First Amendment. We don't have that authority to control the First Amendment right to talk. But as a matter of journalistic integrity, they have not broadcast the results of any state until the polls have closed. They've all decided to do that. But you're not going to get a situation, I don't think, where they're not going to tell you who won in Florida when California is still...
Oh, no, they'll never do that.
Yeah.
No, but what he says is legitimate, because I remember being at the George Bush headquarters back in 2000, and they called us up and said, listen, they called the state of Florida, you need to get back up here because the Panhandle's still open. We need to convince these people that no, they can still vote.
Right.
It was just a debacle. Real quick, we only have about 3 minutes. we wanted to hit the early, not the early registering, but the actual day of voting. And when it comes to is the Florida Division of Elections is actually a particular statute, which I know you looked up, Dave, having to deal with if you go and you vote, you want to vote, what do you need to bring with you in order to verify that you are who you say you are?
Well, you need to bring a picture identification, and that picture identification needs to have a signature. If you do not have a picture identification with the signature, you need to bring a picture identification and something with the signature. And if you do not have these things, you can still vote. Mark, how does that work?
You can do a provisional ballot, which it's going to be, you're going to have signed it, and put it in a provisional ballot envelope and make sure that it matches the signature on your voter registration application. That's the way that they do it.
And let me tell you something. We had Rob Griffin, Judge Rob Griffin, who's just a terrific county court judge. He came and gave a speech at his organization, a local organization called CPAC, not the one that, the more national one. It's actually an organization that is primarily an African-American organization. It actually is comprised of some Republicans and Democrats, local preachers and ministers and attorneys and politicians that are involved. It's all about voter awareness and that sort of thing, and being involved in the issues. And Judge Griffin came down there and gave a speech. And at the end of that speech, there wasn't anybody in that room that did not feel good about the process in Polk County in terms of the folks that are ultimately going to make the call as to whether a vote is going to count or not. Judge Griffin is going to do everything in his power. And I know Judge Griffin. I've known Judge Griffin.
He's on the canvassing board.
He's on the canvassing board, but he's a conservative guy. I have no idea what his political persuasion is, but I suspect it's, it is what it is. But I can tell you that Judge Griffin will march through hell or high water to make sure that every vote that should count is counted. They look for ways to count votes, not for ways to not count votes. These are good people that are working the polls, and I can tell you that everyone in that room, including many folks who are far more liberal than anybody on the canvassing board, felt good about that canvassing board, knowing that they were going to try their very best to count every vote. It's not that hard to vote, folks. It's not nearly as hard as Al Sharpton would have you.
Well, that's the thing. Like you were saying earlier about them making it out that the Jim Crow laws are coming back. I mean, the type of identification you can bring, as long as it has a picture on it, is everything from a driver's license to the Florida registration cards to a
public assistance identification,
public assistance debit card, a credit card, a military identification, any one of these things, and even then you still can vote with the provisional ballot as long as you've registered to vote before.
Yeah, and like I said, they're going to get that ballot back, and if the signatures even remotely match, and you know what, you don't have to be whatever the guy, I can't remember what they're called, the people that analyze handwriting, to figure out if the signatures match. You can tell almost instantly. You remember from your days prosecuting forgeries, Mark, and defending forgeries is what I do. I mean, you can tell instantly if signatures match. And these are smart people that are doing this. They are going to find a way to make these votes count. The amount of noise that you're hearing is not commensurate with what is actually being done.
It's just noise.
It's just noise. Okay, folks, thank you so much for tuning into Law Talk, sponsored by the Kaylor Law Group and Mcmann, PA. We hope you will be here next week at 5:07 p.m.
Have a good week.